All right, it looks like we have a good crew here today. I want to go ahead and welcome you to CFA. Welcome to Control Freaks Anonymous. I'm glad that you're here. Sir, go ahead and come on in. Go ahead and grab, if you're looking for AA, sir, it's down the hall, the door on the right, okay? Sir, if you need the divorce recovery, it's on your left. The rest of you, I hope you're in the right place today. You're in Control Freaks Anonymous. My name is Daniel Mosley, where I'm not only a member of Control Freaks Anonymous, I happen to be the spokesperson. I'm glad that you are here today. You may know that if you're familiar with our program, like we have a leg up on those guys who have 12 steps. We only have 10 steps in our program, so you're in the right place today. Welcome to CFA. Welcome to Control Freaks Anonymous. So if you don't know, that very first step is indeed admitting the fact that we have a problem, that we are indeed control freaks. And so today, I'm not only a control freak, but I am also the president of this. Maybe you're a little bit in denial. Maybe you don't know that you're a control freak yet. Let me help you to see this, okay? And so let's do this a little bit Jeff Foxworthy style. You might be not redneck, you might be a control freak if. Are you ready? You ready for these? I got a handful of them for you. You might be a control freak if you ask your husband why he didn't do something, and the answer is because it won't be right and you're gonna redo it anyway. You might be a control freak. You might be a control freak if you're one of the grammar Nazis on Facebook who like to come behind me and correct my comments. You might be a control freak. You might be a control freak if you have 1,440 things on your calendar today because every minute of your day must be meticulously planned to the second. Welcome to CFA. You might be a control freak if your favorite four-word phrase is, "I told you so." You might be a control freak if you're a literal backseat driver. You're in the backseat and you still reach out and take the steering wheel from the backseat. You might be a control freak if your motto is, if you want it done right, do it yourself. You might be a control freak if you believe that Burger King's slogan of have it your way applies to you only. You might be a control freak if Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way, is one of your favorite tunes. You might be a control freak if you have guests over to the house and you insist that they use coasters everywhere. I've been to your house. I know how it is. You might be a control freak after losing at Monopoly. You take the car and throw it through the TV because you just can't stand losing. You might be a little bit of a control freak. And so today, if you answered yes to two or more of these, my friends, you're being diagnosed with control freak-itis. Anybody have control freak-itis? I have had this thing plague me for years. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some of the symptoms of control freak-itis. I want to talk a little bit about how we treat control freak-itis. What does it look like, and how do we move forward from here, okay? So you might be a control freak and not even know it. So I wanted to kick this off and have a little bit of fun with it, but really, this is something that has some substantial significance behind it. This control freak place, it actually has implications in our personal relationships. And you know this if you're a control freak or you're married to one. It also has implications beyond just our interpersonal relationships. Being a control freak impacts your spirituality a lot. It impacts your relationship with God, with Jesus. Being a control freak will definitely make an impact. And so let's just start from the beginning. Let me help you to see that you're not alone in your control freak nature. In fact, it was there from the beginning of the book. In fact, the very first line of the book sets the stage and begins to set the tension around control. Here's what it says in the very beginning, and you know this part. In the beginning, God did what? He created. God created. And in this very first line, we find what could be, and what often is, the most offensive line in the entire Bible. Because it says, God created and not you, and not me. And therefore, there's something beyond me that is bigger than me, and that's offensive to a lot. And so in the beginning, God created, and then he begins to declare, I'm in control, I'm sovereign. And then there's something that's interesting about that thing he created. We see the heavens and the earth and the moon and the stars, and then he creates you, and he creates me. And as he's the creator, he puts something on the inside of each of us. He puts this desire, this longing, this place that each one of us have for control. Now, we might not call it this way, but really what it is, it's a built-in safety mechanism, if you will. It's the place of, I don't want things out of my control because this is a place where I know that I'm safe. If it's predictable, if I can steer the outcome, if it goes exactly the way that I want it to go, then I'm safe and I'm secure. And I actually want to show and argue that that's put there by God. In fact, one of the things that we do often is we talk around here about temperaments. We talk about personalities, but specifically, we talk about temperaments. We talk about the way that we're hardwired, the way God created you, the way that he created me. It might be a little bit different from your neighbor, some of you a little bit more different than, but God had created, right? And when he creates us unique. And what that means is we approach issues around control slightly differently. And so some of you, just to categorize everybody in 4 parts, if you've been with me through our next level place, some of you are what we would call reds. You're in this control freak. You probably have the biggest propensity towards this. You're a very driven individual, and your temperament is you care more about the outcome than you do, honestly, about some of the people along the way, and you'll control things to help them show up or turn out exactly the way that you desire for them to be. And there's a second group. If you're in colors, it's blue. And now blues amongst us, we're the perfectionists. We're the ones that we have an idea in our mind that things should go exactly this way because it's my way, and my way is the right way, and you can take the highway. Some of us are blues, we're perfectionists, and so control becomes a really big part of how we operate. Now, some of us are not reds and blues, which happen to be my first and second color, which shows a lot how I get to be the president of this organization. But some of us, we might be yellows or we might be greens, and I won't take time for all of that, but what that might mean is your response or your place, your way of approaching this subject matter today might be slightly different. But what I want you to know is that every one of us have issues around control. You're either the one dealing with it because it's your issue, or you know someone, you're married to someone, you do life with someone who has a little bit of a control freak kind of personality about them, all right? And so we're good so far. Everybody kind of got the premise of where we're at? All right, and so in the beginning, God creates, and he creates us with this ability, this decision-making, but it won't take long before we see where this starts to go wrong, where God can put something on the inside of us, and then we somehow manipulate it, change it, and do it our way. You just take from this very first line of the Bible and fast forward over just a couple of chapters, jump into Genesis chapter 3, very popular account of what happened with Adam and Eve, right? And so Adam and Eve, in the very beginning, you know this story, says this, that the serpent said to the woman, "You will surely die, for God knows that when you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be opened and you will," this is important, "and you will what? And you will be like God." Now, Adam and Eve are experiencing the first temptation, and we see that the serpent is presenting it here. But if we can look at it through this lens of control, what he's doing is presenting something that we're all tempted by. It's for us to be in this position here, to be like God, to be like God. That somehow this idea that Adam and Eve were doing was they were taking themselves and putting themselves in a situation where they could be like God. They could be as if they were God, which we would know becomes a form of idolatry. Taking control to such degree that I'm now in the position where God needed to be, It's a form of idolatry. And so Adam and Eve are struggling with this issue. It becomes a temptation for every one of us. We're all tempted with this. When we are trying to control everything and every situation, we're living as if I am, you are, the sovereign, autonomous, creator of all, rule maker, interpreter of. We put ourselves in the position where we demand and take control like Adam and Eve did. And it becomes idolatry, it becomes manipulation. And so we see Adam and Eve, we see God creating them with free will, giving you and I both free will. And we see this story begin to progress. We see what happened with Adam and Eve as they were tempted. We can find this throughout biblical history. In fact, just go a couple more chapters over, and you're going to have the story of Abram and Sarai. Now, you may know them as Father Abraham had many sons. You may know her as Sarah. God changed their name later, but for the context of this story, Abraham and Sarah had received a promise from God that they would become the father of many nations. What on earth does that mean? It simply means that Abraham, because of your faith, Sarah, because of you, I'm going to do something unique through you. I'm going to give you a promise, and there are going to be so many kids coming through your lineage that they'll be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. This becomes the promise, the story of Abraham and Isaac. And this is what God had told them. He said here in verse 16, though, or chapter 16, verse 1, now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne no children. And this becomes the challenge. God had made a promise. God's word was to be true, and yet there were no kids. God had spoken something, he had said something, it was resonating within their heart, and yet they weren't seeing it come to pass. And so what do? They begin to play God. Watch. Here's the next verse, verse 2 here. It says, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar, and she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Husband, there's something that's in my heart. I really want it to happen this way. I thought it was going to happen this way, but apparently it's not. Maybe you and I need to figure out our own plan. Maybe we need to come up with our own solution towards this. And so what do? They begin to play the role that God was supposed to be in. Look at verse 2 here. It says, go, sleep with my slave, and perhaps God's not doing it the way that I want him to do it, not doing it in the time that I want him to do it. It's not going the way that we want, Abraham, so maybe, perhaps we can make it happen. And I just wonder, I read this story and I'm like, oh man, yeah, been there, done that. God, that thing that was in my heart, I felt like you were gonna do it, and I kind of held on to your promise, God. I've been praying about this. I've been thinking about this for a while, but it doesn't seem to be happening. I know what he wants me to do. He wants me to take control. I'm good at taking control. That's what you wanted me to do, God. I'll take control of this situation, and I'll see, just maybe, I can build it. And we put ourselves in the situation of Abram and Sarah, who are struggling with this idea, this longing, this thing, how they think it should go. In fact, they were promised it should go, and now it's not. What do? They begin to play God. So what happens next? We see, so after Abram had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarah took his wife, her Egyptian slave, Hagar, and he gave her husband to be his wife. Next verse, verse 4 says, he slept with Hagar and she did what? I mean, it worked, didn't it? God, you had said a promise you were going to give us many children, and it wasn't happening that way, and we kind of took it upon ourselves. And yeah, I mean, maybe we manipulated it a little bit, God. I mean, yeah, I know what you said, that it was supposed to come through me, but I was in such control, God, that I just had to send my husband to go and do it. You see what she did, right? Not just controlling herself in the situation, but also leaning into, bending her husband, go and do. starting to control the situation. And Abraham, he just bends to the levels of control and pieces of manipulation. And they're struggling through this, and they're wrestling through this place on the inside of them, but it seems to be working until it doesn't work. I want to show you something, and if you don't know biblical history or not much about religious history, this will fill in some gaps for you, okay? I want to just show you something. And so this is the son that was conceived by Hagar and Abraham, Ishmael. Maybe you know that name. And then there's the second son. This is Isaac. If you know biblical history, it's Abraham and Jacob and Isaac, and this becomes the path that God had set out for. This was God's plan, but they weren't okay with God's timing. So they took it upon themselves. They took control of the situation, and they began to make it happen. And she conceives, and she has Ishmael. Later, God does fulfill the promise because his promises are never false. And so they have Isaac. Now, let's fast forward this for just a few years and what happens coming next. If you continue reading the history, there's two lineages that come out of here. It forks, Ishmael and Isaac. And with Ishmael becomes the nation of Palestine, the Palestinians. And if you read a lot of the Old Testament, the Jews were in conflict with Palestine a lot. And if you fast forward this and you follow it throughout world history to even get to more current history, you're going to find that this is the lineage of Muhammad. And you know the religious tensions around this. From this promise, where they took control, they acted as if they were God, Ishmael, the Palestinians, and Muhammad become the results. When they follow the promise the way that God had designed it, Isaac comes, the Jewish nation, and ultimately the birth of Jesus would come. And so as they're taking this upon themselves, this issue of control creates undesired outcomes in their life. It looked like it was going to go the way we wanted, but this is not at all the way we hoped for. And so Ishmael and Isaac, and the control goes bad. So what's the lesson? What do you need to take away from this? Here's the moral of the story. Here's the thing. Write this down. Do not forget this. Never sleep with a woman named Hagar. This is where my mother is not here today to correct me from saying stuff like this. She probably is. She'll be texting my phone here in a few minutes. What's the moral of the story, right? What do we do? We're all of us, every one of us, whether you're like me and truly are like a control freak in recovery, or maybe you're married to one, but every one of us have this part, right? We're all tempted to take control, right? So we've said that step one of CFA is for us to admit that we have a problem, and step two becomes the idea that we need to identify some triggers. Like, what are the things that kind of lead us to like grabbing the reins back and white knuckling this situation and taking control when something doesn't go my way, when something doesn't go my way. This is where I'm really tempted to take control, because my way is the right way and yours is wrong. When things don't go as I planned or as I expected, that situation, that promise, what do? Maybe it's a financial issue. When the finances aren't going the way that you planned and you're going to take it upon yourself, you know what God says about how to handle your money. You know what God says about the tithe and what that looks like, but I mean, let's be honest, you're smarter than God. You can control the situation. I mean, you know best. It's not like God is down here running the calculator and he's running your expenses. You know how much money is left, and you know the bills that still have to be paid. So I'm going to take control of this situation, and I'm going to do it the way, God, I know you had a plan, but you're going to understand this one. I just got to, this is not going my way, God. I got to take control. I don't have a choice. Maybe it's not finances. Maybe it's something else that happens. Maybe you're single and you're looking for that significant other, that guy, that girl, and you know what the Bible says about like unequally yoked, and you know that I'm supposed to look for somebody who's a good Christian guy, a good Christian girl. We share similar values. You know all of that stuff, but I mean, he's so cute. Have you seen her? Wow. Woo. I know, God, I know what you're saying, but I really like him. I know, God, I know, but I can control this. I promise it's not going to lead me anywhere that I don't want to go. You know what, God? I'm going to change them. I can control this. I can make this happen. God, I know that you know best, but in this situation, maybe you just don't see it all. So God, let me, this isn't going my way. Let me work this out. Sometimes there's things that don't go our way, and then there's people that don't go our way. And man, when somebody doesn't do what you want or what you expect, what does that do? It creates frustration within you. And how do we act out in our frustration? Differently, based on your temperament. But what does it look like when someone doesn't go my way? It's that thing at work, you kind of delegated it to that guy, to that girl, but honestly, you just keep micromanaging them because they can't do it your way. Sometimes there's someone who isn't doing things the way that you want or desire or expect them to do. Maybe it's this I get a kick out of this one. Maybe it's like the helicopter parents. You know about the helicopter parents, like just hovering over them, right? It's like, little Johnny, little Susan can't walk to the mailbox without putting on their helmet because you're so afraid. You got to control the situations. Maybe it's that, and this is what happens with us as parents. I can't leave this to God. This isn't going the way that I want it to go. I need to control the situation. I need to protect my children. I need to hover around everything that they're doing and every decision that they're making. I need to control this. Look, I'm a father of 4. I got little ones right now. You're dang right. I'm controlling them. Do what I tell you to do. But what happens when they begin to grow and they're not doing as you thought that they would do, and they make different decisions than what you would have them make and make different choices? We try to interject ourselves, don't we? No. This is the way that it needs to go, and we look to control the situation. Sometimes this issue that we face is when we are trying to control everything. Here's what we're living as. This is what it looks like. When I have to be the one who controls and orchestrates and puts everything in order, when things don't go according to my way because of something or someone, and it begins to create a lot of frustrations that play out in different ways on the inside of me, it's a flashing light. Whew, warning, warning, warning. It's a flashing light that there's an issue. In this moment, and in this situation, and in this circumstance, I do not trust God. I cannot trust God. And so we see this famous place inside of Scripture. It's one of those verses that people put on pillows and put on their walls and stuff, and it says this, and you've read it before. It says this in Proverbs chapter 3. It says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. To trust in the Lord. Do you know what trust really means, especially in this context for us today? Trust is a place of surrender. It means that there is something that I have desires for, expectations for. It means that there are things that are mine in my heart that I really want to see come to pass. And it's a really difficult thing for me to open my hands and to give it away, to trust God with it. Trust is a sign of surrender. When we control stuff, we do this to it. When we surrender something, we do this to it. And so ultimately, when it says to trust in God with all of your heart, surrender to God the things that are often the most difficult for you to surrender to Him. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart. And that becomes the issue. I can trust God with 95% of things in my life. I'm really good at that. I've built up enough faith. I've seen enough history. But man, there are some things, even still, even pastoring a church, that it is hard to say, okay, this one, I trust you with it. I'll just be honest with you. There are some things that some lessons that you learn and you just kind of you get it and you got it and you move forward. And then there are some things that you just manage kind of the rest of your days. This is one of those things that if we're not intentional, if they're not mindful, then we grab back from God what we gave over to him to trust. Nope, I don't like your timing, God. I don't like how you're handling this. This is not the way I would do it. I'm going to be like God. I'm going to play God. Give it back. We don't say this out loud, do we? When's the last time you had a conversation? Hey, God, I don't trust you with that anymore. Give it back to me. But how often do we do it? What does it look like? See, trust in God with all of your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Verse 6, in all of your ways, acknowledge him. Now, this word acknowledge is like the same word that we use for like to know someone in the Bible. It's a sign of intimacy. To know God well enough, to be close enough in relationship with him, that there is a trust that spills out of that. In all of your ways, know him so intimately well and acknowledge his role in your life, and he will, not I will, he will make your path straight. He will make your paths straight. See, what it really requires is trusting God means that I have to relinquish control. That's what it means. A trust in God. Trust in God in all of your ways and acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. It means that I have to relinquish the control that I so desperately am gripping to. You know why this is so hard? It taps into our greatest fear. It's hard to trust not just another individual, but particularly hard to trust in God because it taps into this place inside of our greatest fear. Right? So there's this tension that exists between the head and the heart. You're going to have them here, the heart and the mind. There's this tension that exists. In my heart, I want to do the thing that I know God has called me to. In my heart, I want to trust God with even the most difficult things. But where it starts to become really difficult is here. Because relinquishing control begins to tap into my greatest fears. Places around my own insecurities, places around your own insecurities. It's not going to go the way that you wanted. It's not going to go the way that you hoped. There's something about putting your trust somewhere else. There's unexpected outcomes. And our mind goes to, and this is why you want to control, our mind goes to the worst case scenarios. What's going to happen to my children if I don't do this? What's going to happen to my marriage if I don't start to control this? What will happen at work if I really just surrendered this and gave it to God? I'm not sure I could do that. This fear on the inside of our mind plays out. Even when we have trust within our hearts, we wrestle through this tension. And what we learn is that control becomes a trust buster. See, we said trust in the Lord with all of your heart. But with those areas that it's really difficult to trust in, control becomes that trust buster. And so it puts us in this situation and where we see, and you know this to be true, like you know this in your, let's just forget spiritual relationship. You know this to be true in your interpersonal relationships. If a person is trying to control every aspect of your relationship, trying to control what happens in the home and how you engage with each other and all of that, there might be a level of submissiveness that takes place. There might be. But it is busting the trust in that relationship. You don't trust me. You just want me to do what you want me to do, and that's what makes you happy until I don't do that. I'm going to help you married folks. This is what happens sometimes. When one of us are trying to control the other one in the situation, you're busting trust, not building it. The same thing is also true of our relationship with God. It is a trust buster. Whenever we feel like we have to gain control and take back control, we have broken down the trust that we have between us and the Lord. Now, you know this, and you've heard this said before, that control is not just a trust buster. Control is also an illusion. The idea that somehow that I am in control, that if I do everything right, That if I can plan it perfectly, if I get every detail and I line them all up, then it will go exactly the way I want. Now, you've lived enough life to know that this is far from true. You can do everything perfect. You can have the best laid plan, and life happens. For a lot of us, a lot of life has happened in the last year, hasn't it? Control, I think maybe now more than any time that we see that this is an illusion. And so control becomes an illusion because so much of life is beyond our control. So many things happen outside of what I can pinpoint and detail and dictate. You know, I've been a control freak for a while, but I've been in recovery, thankfully. The Lord has been working on me. I want to share a few things that I've learned over the last 40 years as a control freak. I learned that I do not control and did not control the day that I was born. I did not control where I was born. Did not control who my parents were. I didn't control the color of my skin, the color of my eyes. I didn't control my socioeconomic status. I cannot control the weather. I cannot control the people at the restaurant with my food, no matter how much I want you to please bring it to me. I can't dictate that. I cannot control the person driving in front of me so slow at a 55. And all I can do is remind them that they're number one. Not really, I don't do that. There are things that are just beyond our control, aren't they? I can't control what people think about me. I can't control whether people like me or don't like me. I cannot control my kids' future. I'm trying my best to direct it right now, but I ultimately won't be able to control it. And I can't not control the fact that I'm growing older. I look in the mirror and I find age spots and new gray hairs every single day, and some of you are like, dude, you're too young, shut up. And some of you are like, yeah, he is an old guy. It's all subjective, right? There are so many things that I've learned at 40 that I just cannot control. There are things that I have learned that I will not control. I won't control the day that I die and go and meet Jesus as much as I would like to. I won't control it. I can't control as much as I've tried. I can't control you. Can't control the person that I'm sharing faith with that I would love for them to receive Jesus. I can't do that. I can't control them. I think probably more than anything, and this was the hardest lesson for me, is in 40 years, I tried every way humanly possible to control God. My views of God, my theology of God, my perspective of God. And what I learned in 40 years is I cannot manipulate him. I can't change him. There are things that I can't control. It's pretty sobering, honestly, if we think about how much it is outside of our control. And then those of us who are control freaks, anxiety begins to grow up within us. Oh my gosh, it really is outside of my control. I think what I've learned is the things I want to control the most are the most precious to me. And those are the things furthest from my control. See, here's what I've learned. The true freedom is found in trusting God, even when it's the thing that's the most precious to me. You're not unlike me. You have some things that you want to control, that you'd like to be different. You'd like the timing to change. You have situations that keep you up at night, anxieties, things that you worry about, things that you struggle to trust God with. I think that's human nature. We see this in every individual throughout Scripture, and we can recognize it within our hearts. But what we learn is that true freedom, to come to the place where we really can open up our hands and trust God with something that's difficult to do, this brings about true freedom on the inside of our hearts and on the inside of our lives. And so what do? How do we move from being a control freak to actually experiencing some of the freedoms with trusting God, what's difficult to trust him with? How do we do that? Now, we don't have 10 steps. I can't solve it all here. I'm 40 years in to this change happening within me. But what I can do is help you with some questions that I ask, that I put in as filters, that I vet things that I'm trying to control in my life, and I'm just going to give them to you, okay? And here's the first question that we should ask. Is it worth my worry? This thing, this situation, this has got me all perplexed and up in arms about, this thing that I'm really wanting to control. Some things we just wig out about, don't we? They're just not worth the worry. I think about this place inside of our relationships, especially in my marriage with my wife. I've told you before, so I'm an only child, and then my wife is a firstborn. How many of you think that we had some control issues up front? Who's going to take the lead on this? No, I'm not giving in. Well, I'm not giving in. Well, I'm going to control this. Well, I'm going to control this. Early on, this is when we were engaged. I hope you remember this. We were engaged, and we're in that the registry stage. So beep, 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 beep. That's fun, man. Just go and scan everything and hope people buy stuff. I remember doing that, and we were doing this you're newly married, and so you've got all these ideals, and you romanticize everything, and then you get your first year of marriage and reality check, right? So we're inside of, I say that, it's all been bliss, baby. It's all been wonderful bliss, okay? If anything, I've been the issue, okay? I'm rolling myself under the bus. I get it. So let me tell you, early on, we were going to bleep, 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 bleep. And I'm so controlling, man, in this regard early on. I'm highly opinionated. I also am not like a lot of guys. I'm highly detailed. I love design, aesthetics, that kind of stuff. So I care a lot about those things. And we're early on, and my wife was like, hey, babe, I really like these plates. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, you ain't picking out our plates, girl. I'm going to be eating my steak on this every single night. You're going to be in that kitchen cooking, and I want them to be on this plate right here. You see why we had issues? Bleep, 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 bleep. No, you can scan all of that stuff. These plates right here, nah, we need to pick these right here. And I pushed the issue so much so that my father-in-law, who has been my pastor, got involved and said, hey, bro, let me just tell you something. In a few years from now, it's not going to be worth your worry. There are some things, man, we just want to control because we think that they need to be controlled. Now, I'm making light of something small, but there are things in your world, things that you're trying to control, that are not worth your worry. And so this is a great question for us to start with. And so in Luke, Jesus is talking here, and Jesus does what he does often. He just comes in and he drops these statements. They're so much easier for you to say, Jesus, than it is for me to actually do. Here's the verse where he says this in Luke chapter 12. He says, Jesus says to his disciples, I'm going to tell you, hey guys, don't worry. You see this and your anxiety goes through the roof. What does he want me to worry about? Surely there's something I'm going to be worried about, right? I can't control all the situations. Therefore, don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. Your life is more than food. Your body is more than clothes. Jesus is coming on the scene and says, hey guys, there are plenty of things in the world that you're going to be tempted to worry about, but not all of them are worth your worry. Why are you getting so up in arms, so caught up? Why are you losing sleep? Why do you have anxiety? Do not worry. Do not worry. And he goes on, he says, consider the ravens, you know this. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't have a storeroom, they don't put things up in a barn, and yet God does what God does because he's sovereign and he's in control. And then he says, that famous line in verse 25 here, it says, who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Has anybody figured this one out yet? Maybe if I'm just anxious enough, if I've just furrowed my brow just enough, maybe I can worry about it, and now I'm going to get an hour back on my life. Anybody been successful with this yet? So Jesus says, yeah, there's lots of stuff that you're going to be tempted to control that are outside of your control. Do not worry about those things. Instead, trust me with them. That's what he's saying, right? Birds of the air, lilies of the field. Trust me. Stop trying to trust yourself. Stop worrying about things when you are coming up short. What are you going to do? Who of you can add an hour to your life by worrying? So that becomes the first question that we should ask. Is it worth my worry? me give you a second question, and this is one I've been holding on to get here because I don't want you to miss this idea. But this second question is this: is it mine to control? This is a good question, a necessary question. Do not miss asking this question out of the three of them. Am I responsible for this? Don't miss this question, because the answer is sometimes, yeah, you are. You are. Sometimes you are responsible, that God expects you to do certain things. That trusting God does not mean that he does it all and you have no part. In fact, surrendering control is not the same thing as relinquishing responsibility. This is really important. Don't miss this. Oh, I'm going to trust God. Oh, praise God. It's just all going to go well. I don't have anything to do. You know, I just trust God with my marriage. I don't need to grow. There's nothing for me to work on. There's nothing within me. You know, I'm just going to trust God in this area of my finances. I know I'll just let the government send me another check. There are these places, though, aren't there? Where we want to just push that one off to God. Oh, he's going to take care of that one. I don't have to do anything. I don't have any. There are some things that we need to ask the question, am I responsible for this? The answer is yes for a lot of them. No, this isn't the issue for most of us, but I don't want to leave out another part of a group here, because some of us might be like, and God may want to get you in gear about this. So is it mine to control becomes a healthy question. And Proverbs 6:6 says to us this. He says, check out the ant, go to the ant, you're sluggard, and consider its ways and be wise. Right? There are some things, some loads, some burdens, some things that you're going to have to put your strength towards and that you're going to have to be a part of the solution. So simple question, but a powerful question. Is it worth my worry? Number two, is it mine to control? And the most important of this, is it for God alone? Is it for God alone? Is this one of those situations that I'm so desperately trying to control, but if I really sorted it out and I really acknowledged it, there's nothing I can do about this. This is beyond my control anyway. In fact, I was never supposed to try to control this. This one is for God alone. These are great questions to help you as you're vetting this, right? So Paul, he is in Roman prison, and he writes this passage here in Philippians when he says this: do not be anxious about anything. Now, in prison, in a desperate situation, his life is on the line, his freedom has been taken from him. I imagine that Paul might be tempted to try to take control of situations like this. But in that moment, what he's saying to us is essentially what Jesus was saying. Don't worry. He says, don't be anxious. Don't be anxious about anything, but in what? In every situation, in every circumstance, in every relationship. In every place that you are tempted to grab the reins and take control, don't be anxious about that thing, but in every situation, in prayer, petition, present your requests to God. And he talks about this idea, and this is an important part of trusting God in the relationship. There are some things that I have to give to God, which means I do this in prayer. That's how I do that, by the way. I communicate with God. God, I'm giving this to you. That's prayer. I'm talking with him. I'm petitioning. God, I know this is a really difficult thing. I'm going to trust you with it in this moment through prayer and petition. Do you know what we do as the church sometimes as Christians? Prayer becomes the absolute last resort. All we can do is pray. Do you not think that God is offended by that statement? This is so far out of our control. There's nothing we can do in this moment that my last resort is, now I'm going to pray. And Paul, in this moment, outside of control, nothing he can do about his situation. In this moment, I'm petitioning, I'm praying, and I'm taking it to God. God, I'm trusting you. And he says this. This is the direct result. This is what happens of us putting our trust in God. In verse 7, he says this. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding. I think it's a little bit ironic that The places where we try to white knuckle and we try to take and grip and hold the tightest to, that we try to control the most, you know what it actually is doing? It chokes out the peace that we have. That's why your mind is plagued. That's why it doesn't stop. That's why the wheels keep turning. That's why it keeps you up at night. Your peace has been taken away from you. By trying to control this situation, you're actually, ironically, taking away the very thing that you wanted, that you desired. If I can control all moving parts, then I'm safe and secure and there's peace in my life. When things are out of control, it feels a little bit chaotic, and therefore my temptation is to try to control. But if I will trust God with it, be anxious for nothing, in all things through prayer and petition, make my requests known to God, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, bloop, 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 these fears that I have in my mind, the phobias of what it means to actually lose control, well, that's going to get replaced by the peace of God, which transcends my way of thinking and my way of understanding the world around me. And it moves from an intellectual peace, and it moves back into the heart. It moves past the fear that I struggle with in my mind, and it moves into the place of my heart that I know that I can trust God. There's a wrestling match that goes on in all of us between the head and the heart. And Paul knows this. Jesus knows this. Be anxious for nothing, and the peace of God. Some things, my friends, are for God alone. Some things that you're not going to be able to control. Married folks, your spouse is one of them. There's that thing inside of your spouse, that person that you're married to, and it drives you crazy. Of course, my wife and I don't have any of that. She never has anything like that with me. But we try to control that thing. We try to change that thing. We try to fix that thing. Spouse is making a bad decision, a decision that we don't like, that we don't agree with. And we can try to control it, but ultimately all it's going to do is it's going to further complicate the problem. Either they're going to submit to it, kind of like what Abraham did with Sarah. It's like, hey, I'm just going to go and do this thing. But then it might create resentment later. You're controlling them. You're not trusting them. We can try to control it, we can try to change it, or we can do what we really need to do is, God, this one is for you alone. My spouse, not for me to change. My responsibilities within the marriage, is this for me to take part of? Yeah, I have some work to do, but it is not changing my spouse. That is not my job. And so I trust God in this area. We give it to the Lord. There are places where we have to trust God. Some of you are in the place of sickness and ailment, physical things going on within your body. It doesn't make sense to you. It's not according to your plan. It's not what you thought out. It's not what you dreamed of. It's not what's in your heart and in your head. God, have you come off of the throne? Are you no longer in control? Do I need to take? You can't do anything about that. There are some things that are beyond our control. God, this one belongs to you alone. There are times when we are tempted, like Abraham and Sarah, like Adam and Eve, to put ourselves in the position where we want to be, where we pretend to be, just like God. In fact, we elevate ourselves, don't we? We elevate ourselves to the position where we believe and act as if we are God. Whenever you feel tempted to reach back out and to grab that thing that you have given over, in that moment, hear my words, be reminded, am I pretending to be God in this situation? Am I trying to take control of something that is not mine to control? So there's a few questions that help us with this. The first one you got, is it worth my worry? The second one, is it mine to control? Or third, is it for God alone? So here's the final question. Here's where I'm going to pray with you. We're going to bring it all to a head. What are you desperately trying to control? What's going on in your life? What situation, what circumstance, what thing are you just trying to make it happen? You're trying to force it. Maybe there was a promise. Maybe there was something you were standing on. Maybe there's something that you believe. Maybe there's something that frustrates you. Maybe there's something with your children, something in your finances, something in your marriage. What is that thing that you're trying to control? But if you were honest, this one really belongs to God. This one is for God alone. What is that thing? Now let me ask you the final question. What would it look like if you gave it to God? How might your life be different as a result of that? Not having that thing that makes you anxious, that makes you worry. Not just your life. How might the life of those around you be different? Your spouse, your kids? What would it look like to go from the place of having to white knuckle something to actually opening your hands and saying, okay, God, all right, you got my attention. I've trusted you with a lot, but not with this. Today, I'm going to give you this. Whatever this is for you, in this moment, we're going to pray, and the band is going to lead us in song. This is an opportunity for you in some symbolic way, maybe literally, God, I'm giving this to you. But to take a moment and solidify this. This isn't a pastor and you, this is you and your relationship with God. So we're going to take a moment when the song comes on, and then I just want you to turn it over, to give it to God, to trust him with it. Could we do that? I know it's difficult, especially in areas that are the closest to us, that matter the most to us. But he is trustworthy. He is faithful. He has never let me down. In every moment when I learned to trust him, when I dared to trust him, it changed so many things in my relationships and in my finances. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you are trustworthy, that you are faithful, that you never leave us, that you never forsake us, that you never abandon us. God, that you never take your eyes off of the circumstance and the situation that we find ourselves in. Sometimes, God, it seems like your voice has either gone silent or you're absent, or maybe you're even incapable of the thing that we're desiring, and it becomes hard to trust you. God, would you help us when the temptation to become control freaks rises within us? God, would you remind us when we try to play God, when we try to act as if we are you? Forgive us, Lord. Father, help us as we trust you in all of our ways, not just some of them. God, that we acknowledge you, and then we stand on your promise that the peace of God would replace anxiety and worry and fear and doubt within us. God, I thank you for the work that you're doing here today. In Jesus' name.